So, welcome to all of you. Thanks for attending this FEAST webinar. FEAST is a fellowship of Anglican scholars in theology, an initiative done by USPG, which is a United Society Partners in Gospels, is a mission agency in UK, working with the provinces around Anglican provinces around the globe. And we do 3 or 4 this kind of webinars a year with someone, and then one conference in person, which is about to come in October. We are very glad today to have the Reverend Dr. Chris Doddswell. I can never say your name. Okay, well, I will end it then.
Dowdeswell, but very close.
Okay. So,
Two syllables.
Reverend Chris is with us. He is from the Anglican Diocese of Calgary. He is the dean of the cathedral there, and he will introduce more properly on his area of study field, and he then will go with the presentation. Maybe start with a word of prayer, maybe. Joy, would you like to do a word of prayer to us? Sorry to put you on the
Oh,
spot.
that's a surprise. Sure.
Thank you, Joy.
Father, thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for Chris and his willingness to share his knowledge and wisdom. And we thank you for good weather, especially here. And we do pray for this evening and for what we're about to hear. And may we be thoughtful and encouraged. And we just give it all over to you, Lord. And thank you for this chance to be together. Amen.
Amen.
Please.
Yes, I'd be happy to share a little bit about my background. As Paulo mentioned, I'm the dean of the cathedral here in Calgary. I'm just getting over a little bit of a cold, so my apologies. I've got a lozenge in my mouth, and that's why I look like a little bit like a squirrel this evening. But it's good to be together with you. I'm very excited to share my some of my research. I started on the PhD path quite a long time ago. I just finally defended my dissertation a few years ago and been juggling that with the demands of raising a family and ministering in the church and all those good things. So it's been a long time coming, but one of the benefits of spreading it out has been a lot of time to reflect on the life in the church, life in the communion over the last 15, 20 years. And it certainly has informed my own thought development and the direction of my research. My doctoral program was interdisciplinary in psychology and theological epistemology. And so theories of rationality and theological method, things like this, are close to my heart. And so you'll see a lot of that in the presentation. I do draw on it directly, but I only touched on the communion tangentially in my dissertation, and this obviously holds a big focus of my presentation for this evening. So I will go ahead and share my screen with you. I have some PowerPoint slides I'm happy to make available if people would like them afterwards. Just bear with me. So my presentation for this evening is entitled The Anglican Communion, Renewing Our Common Life. In August of 2022, Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby stood before the Lambeth Conference and said something I think was remarkable, not for its conclusions, but for its honesty. He described two groups in the Anglican Communion, each clinging to a position they considered non-negotiable, each experiencing derision and contempt, each feeling that the other's very path threatened their very existence. And then he said this. He said, "We are deeply divided. That will not end soon." And he was right. I want to suggest to you today that this division, as painful as it is not the root cause. The deeper problem preceded the division, and unless we identify it clearly, we will continue to mistake the symptom for the disease. As I said, the title of my presentation is The Anglican Communion, Renewing Our Common Life. And hope that we might renew our common life is grounded in a clear-eyed understanding of what went wrong and what we already possess to make it right. The root problem, I will argue in my presentation, is that we have drifted from the Elizabethan settlement by ceasing to settle. To understand that claim, we need to remember what the Elizabethan settlement was, and more importantly, what it was for. First of all, it was not a creed frozen in amber. You might remember this image from the classic film Jurassic Park. We won't resurrect our own life today by somehow unfreezing what had been alive many years ago. The Elizabethan settlement, established through the Act of Uniformity in 1559, established an ongoing living process of settling. When Elizabeth I came to the throne, she inherited a church that had lurched between Henry's Catholicism, Edward's Protestantism, and Mary's Counter-Reformation. The genius of the Act of Uniformity was not that it found the final answer to every theological dispute. It was that it found a framework capacious enough to hold genuine disagreement while still enabling the church to function as a unified body. The settlement was at its core a pragmatic achievement. It was a living process, a way of being church together across difference. What made it Anglican was not the specific doctrines it enshrined, but the posture it modeled. That unity in worship and mission could coexist with diversity in theology. That liturgy could be a meeting point for those who interpreted it differently. And that the church was capable of holding tension without requiring uniformity. The continental Reformed tradition gave itself the motto, Ecclesia Reformata Semper Reformanda, the Reformed Church always reforming. Anglicanism might have coined a parallel phrase, Ecclesia Composita Semper Componenda, the settled church always settling, not restless, not indecisive, but engaged in the ongoing, demanding, and spirit-led work of continuing to compose ourselves around our common life, our common prayer, and our common mission in a changing world. That is the logic of the settlement. It is the logic we have drifted away from, but I want to insist it is a logic still there for us to recover and to build upon. The departure did not happen all at once, and it did not happen because Anglicans became evil or careless. It happened because of something much more ordinary. We chose to no longer reason together across our genuine differences. Archbishop Welby's words at Lambeth diagnosed the symptom beautifully. Two groups, each formed around deeply held convictions, each experiencing their position as identity constituting, each interpreting the other's existence as an existential threat. What he described as not a failure of charity, as our differences are sometimes characterized, what he described as a breakdown of reasoning. Specifically, a breakdown of what the dissertation on which this presentation draws calls perspective taking. Instead of continuing to settle, that is, instead of maintaining that Elizabethan posture of finding frameworks that hold diversity together, the communion increasingly retreated to what we might call positional entrenchment. Each group reached for what philosopher Jürgen Habermas would recognize as a foundationalist mode of argument. We stated our facts, cited our authorities, and treated the other side's position as simply incompatible with reason itself. In the language of my dissertation, this is what it looks like when a community becomes cognitively fused to its own metaphysical framework, when it loses the psychological flexibility to take the perspective of those who reason differently and begins instead to simply demand compliance or to declare separation. Now that I've shared my perspective on the problem, I want to spend the rest of our time on what I propose as a possible solution. In chapter 3 of my dissertation, I develop what I call a perspective-taking model of human rationality. It is a map of how human beings actually reason, not how we ideally should reason in some abstract philosophical sense, but how our species, given our evolutionary history, actually makes meaning in groups. The basis of the model is quite simple. Drawing on the research of social anthropologist Robin Dunbar, I argue that the defining cognitive achievement of our species, the thing that allowed us to cooperate in increasingly large groups, was not language itself, but the perspective-taking capacity that language both requires and extends. Before we could say, I think, therefore I am, we had to be able to think that you think that I think something. Before theology, before philosophy, before parliament, even before language itself, there was perspective taking. Dunbar's research showed that different primates achieve different levels of this perspective taking capacity. Not primates, as in the figureheads of our national churches, although I'm sure that they too vary in their perspective taking ability, but primates. Macaques can manage first order intentionality. Chimpanzees reach second order. There is evidence that our hominid precursors could reach third order, and normal adult humans typically operate at fourth order. That would be something like, I believe that you suppose that there are powers that can understand that we both desire something. What makes religion possible, Dunbar notes, is precisely this fourth level of intentionality. It is the cognitive prerequisite for prayer, for worship, for moral community. In my dissertation, I transpose this evolutionary perspective-taking framework onto three distinct modes of human rationality. I call them PT1, PT2, and PT3, shorthand for perspective-taking levels 1, 2, and 3. PT1 asks, what is real? This mode of reasoning is optimally effective for small groups navigating a shared physical world. It operates intuitively and efficiently, but it struggles with othering, the tendency to treat those who see reality differently as simply wrong or dangerous. PT1 communities speak in facts and ultimatums. In a faith context, this looks like treating foundationalist appeals to scripture or tradition as self-evident. PT2 asks, what am I experiencing? It is reflexive and therefore idealist and concerned with consciousness. According to Dunbar, this level of perspective taking is optimally effective for medium-sized communities, what we might call family groups. PT2 communities speak in narrative and personal testimony in shared spiritual experience. The risk at this level is a kind of narcissistic projection, assuming that because something is true for me, it must be true for you. In a faith context, this looks like calls for personal conversion or the insistence that the church must reflect one's own spiritual journey. PT3 asks, what can we make together? It is pragmatist. This form of reasoning is optimally effective for larger communities of roughly 150, what has come to be known as Dunbar's number. This is an optimal tribal group size, and this is the level where language is used not just to assert or testify, but to negotiate, coordinate, and co-create. But here is what I propose as the crucial insight from my dissertation. No single PT level is sufficient on its own. We are seeking to function well on a global scale, and a healthy global community, whether secular or religious, needs all three levels operating together for group participants to be able to adapt to one another on different perspective-taking levels. I call this contemplative reasoning because perspective-taking can be viewed as a contemplative skill. When one perspective-taking level becomes dominant and crowds out the others, the result is a breakdown of reasoning. The community loses its capacity to adapt, to grow, and to hold together. Now, I want to acknowledge one recent development in the communion that has also identified this problem of reasoning and which has sought to offer practical tools in response. Archbishop Justin Welby helped establish a course called the Difference Course to equip people with the skills needed for the difficult work of reasoning together. It is a very good tool, and the practices it trains people in are effective. It does not go into the science underlying our reasoning processes in the way that my work does, but most people understandably seek out tools that give quick and tangible results, and for various reasons might not appreciate the need to understand the science of perspective taking, which those same tools are attempting to tap into. I hope to work together with the Difference team in the future to help their tools be even more effective. Drawing on the work of Harvard developmental psychologist Stephen Kane, I, in my dissertation, adapted a coding diagram originally developed for analyzing children's social play into a tool for adult groups navigating genuine disagreement. The diagram maps what happens when people operating at different perspective-taking levels try to make meaning together. It identifies 9 possible interaction types ranging from what I call zero dissonance, where people share a dominant reasoning level and communicate easily, through to second-degree dissonance, where shared meaning is strained to the max. This maps directly onto what we have witnessed in the Communion's recent decades. What we have seen is not simply a conflict between conservatives and progressives, it is a conflict between communities operating at different perspective-taking levels, with no shared framework for translating between those levels. The traditionalist wing has, broadly speaking, operated at PT1 and PT2, asserting the factual givenness of received teaching and appealing to the experiential authority of numerically larger and culturally different parts of the communion. The progressive wing has operated primarily at PT2 and PT3, appealing to evolving understandings of human experience and dignity, and trying to establish new frameworks to safeguard these developments. Both are inadequate. That is because each side has increasingly operated in that territory of second-degree dissonance, what I call revolutionary mode, confronting the perceived context rather than attending to the complexities of their dialogue partners and seeking a shared meaning. Traditionalists have drifted into an evangelism stance, interacting with progressives as if they were simply secular PT3s in need of conversion to a PT1 orthodox reality. Progressives, meanwhile, have drifted towards a modus vivendi posture or way of life, seeking a peaceful coexistence in spite of irreconcilable disagreement, but without the deeper goal of a shared life. Here is why that distinction matters enormously. A modus vivendi is not the same as settling. The reason the Elizabethan Settlement was not merely a modus vivendi is that it was enshrined first and foremost in the Book of Common Prayer, a shared act of worship, not a peace treaty. Settling is about a way of life together in the same house. This is where a family settles. Modus vivendi, by contrast, is more of the good fences make good neighbors philosophy. It is radically isolationist. Both postures, the traditionalist evangelism and the progressive isolation, have turned away from the patient, flexible, perspective-taking work that reasoning together actually demands. The capacity to read one another's behavior accurately, the awareness to recognize what level of reasoning is operative in a given moment, and the skill to intervene compassionately to help the group as a whole reach its full reasoning potential. We all have the ability to think at different perspective-taking levels because normally functioning humans all have that ability, but we struggle with the ability to be dynamic in our perspective-taking. We need to be able to shift our reasoning level depending on what the context demands. Practice in coding our own behavior using the coding diagram just introduced helps develop these skills. It depicts the breadth of effective reasoning, helps groups to see clearly what kind of conversation they are actually having, and suggests interventions when needed. But there are also other tools available to help us grow in our perspective-taking ability. Another tool from my dissertation is for individuals called the Act 4 Coding Matrix. based on acceptance and commitment training, the psychological modality that I draw from. This helps individuals notice the differences between their values and the cognitive fusion that prevents them from acting on those values. There are also what we might call therapeutic concepts, terms which help us to take an observer perspective on our own thoughts. One such therapeutic concept I develop in my dissertation is metaphysical compartmentalization. This is the ability to hold one's own metaphysical commitments while also opening space for others to reason from theirs. We kind of put our own commitments on a shelf for a moment and do not require the other person to share our assumptions so that we can be more genuinely open to their perspective. Finally, there are resources which are scientifically effective, which are rooted in our ancient spiritual traditions. One of these is what I call the observer perspective, capitalizing O to indicate a God's eye view of ourselves, which is necessarily PT2 level or higher. Our tradition already gifts us with tools that cultivate an observer perspective, individual practices of prayer, the practice of spiritual direction, and of course, practices of corporate worship, as enshrined in our Book of Common Prayer. The Anglican tradition also has, built into its very DNA, some resources for the kind of contemplative reasoning I describe. I believe this provides the basis for a reasonable hope for the communion's future, not naive optimism, but grounded confidence in what is already here. Our practice of common prayer trains the community and the observer perspective together, placing worshippers within a shared narrative frame larger than their individual position. Our synodical governance, in the Anglican tradition at its best, empowers effective reasoning practices, and our comprehensiveness, so often mocked as indecision, is actually a hard-won institutional practice of holding PT1, PT2, and PT3 forms of reasoning in conversation with one another. The deepest problem in the Anglican Communion is not that we disagree. The problem is that we have stopped trusting the processes by which our tradition has always, at its best, worked through disagreement. We have stopped settling. But the capacity to settle again is not lost. Resources from our tradition, as well as modern science, are already among us. We need only the courage to use them. If we are to recover, we do not need new doctrines. We need to cultivate in this generation new habits of reasoning, contemplative habits, perspective-taking habits, the habits of a community humble enough to keep listening, flexible enough to keep adapting, and faithful enough to believe that the Spirit is still at work in the messy, provisional, and never quite finished business of being the church together. The hope I am offering today is not hope that the conflict will simply dissolve or that one side will finally persuade the other. It is hope grounded in the recognition that we've been here before, starting in 1558, and in every generation since that has had to find a way of settling amidst disagreement. The settled church always settling. That is our vocation as Anglicans, and there is every reason to believe that we can renew our common life by returning to it. Thank you.